right, yesterday we made it to Belize. The travel time actually felt really short compared to what we usually do. It only took 2 short flights to make it to Belize City. From there, we hopped aboard the Belize Express water taxi and rode it out to the island of Ambergris Caye. After checking into our beachfront hotel, it was dinner time, so we wandered into town and ate at a nearby Indian restaurant. A less than thematic choice for our first meal in Belize, but it was so delicious. We're on San Pedro, which is a great place to go scuba diving. Belize is actually known for its great scuba diving, so that's what we came here for. If all goes well, me and Vince are going to be getting our advanced open water certification, and Bonnie and David will be getting their open water certifications. And just like that, we hopped into the water for our first dive on the Belize Barrier Reef. This was me and Vince's first deep dive, and we went down to 101 feet, or about 30 meters. We also got to see our first ever nurse shark and Caribbean reef shark on this dive, a sight that would become much more familiar over the next few days. We just got back from dive number 1. We went down to 101 feet. That's the deepest we've ever been. Everything went off without a hitch except Vince's new dive computer doesn't work. But we did see a nurse shark and a reef shark. I love sharks, and if the rest of our dives have as many sharks as this, I'm going to be very happy. After a surface interval, we were back underwater for our navigation dive. Vince and I had to navigate in a large square using a compass and counting our kick cycles to time when we could turn. At the end of the square, we ended up back where we started, which was the goal, so yay, we passed. Me and Vince just finished our second advanced open water dive, so we did our navigation dive. I was actually kind of nervous for that one because I'm not so good with compasses, but it went fine. It was totally easy. We saw a grouper on that dive that was really cool. It was huge. Bonnie and David are done with open water dives 1 and 2 and with their confined water stuff. By the end of the day tomorrow, they're gonna have their open water certification, and me and Vince are gonna have our advanced open water certification. I can't think of a better way to celebrate a successful day of dive training than with chocolate. Luckily, there was a chocolate boutique just a block down the street from our hotel. Oh, that's really good. And who can resist a post-chocolate smoothie? While the snacks were great, we had actually gone out in search of a nearby iguana sanctuary that we'd noticed on Google Maps. We met the sanctuary's owner, and he showed us around the property, pointing out a few iguanas lounging high up in tree branches. He said we should come back on a sunnier day. Apparently, it just wasn't hot enough for the iguanas, so we decided to try again the next day and see if we had any better luck. While wandering aimlessly around San Pedro, we noticed a water slide out in the ocean and decided to give it a try. After drying off, we ended the day at Palapa Bar and Grill, where we got dinner and toasted to David's birthday. The next morning, we woke up to a surprising amount of commotion on the beach. Apparently our hotel has a movie filming here today. For some strange reason, they weren't interested in casting any of us as extras. But we were there to dive, not become movie stars, and within a couple of hours, we were doing just that. Vince and I combined with Bonnie and David on this dive. They did a straight line navigation skill, and then when they were done with that, Vince and I did some buoyancy practice by swimming through a ring and then touching our regulators to a line of spikes our instructor had placed on the sandy bottom. After all 4 of us had completed our respective skills, we got to relax and enjoy the rest of the dive. Soon it was time for our second dive of the day. This would be Bonnie and David's final dive for their open water course, and Vince and I would be working on identifying the fish that we saw on this one. That turned out to be more challenging than I was anticipating because there was so much action happening that it was hard to keep up. We'd actually seen a reef shark at the surface before we even got into the water this time. I quickly lost track of how many sharks cruised past and overhead. We saw a large barracuda, and a nurse shark and grouper tagged along with us, never leaving our presence for the entire dive. Combine all of this with a plethora of colorful little reef fish, and I started to feel a bit frantic between trying to film everything while also scribbling all of the species I could onto my underwater slate. So as of like an hour ago, Bonnie and David are officially open water divers, and me and Vince got our certificates a little bit early. We do still have one more dive tonight, and then we'll be like officially official. This morning we did our peak performance buoyancy dive, and then later we did our fish identification dive, and then tonight we're gonna do a night dive. A nearby Salvadoran restaurant was the perfect spot for a fast early dinner, and the pupusas we ordered there were delicious. We came back to the iguana place today because we were told that it's better when it's hot out. There are more iguanas. I was so happy we'd taken the advice to come back on a hot day because there were so many more iguanas this time. These beautiful lizards are locally threatened and are now protected under Belizean law. It was so cool to get to see so many of them in one place and to get an up-close look at their vibrant colors and patterning. Back at the hotel, we all hopped back on the dive boat and zoomed off toward a nearby shallow dive site. Nighttime brings out a whole different array of creatures than what we had been seeing in the day, and I was really hoping that we would be lucky enough to get to see an octopus. At first we didn't find much, but gradually we started to notice more animals. Someone spotted a spotted eel, and then we ran into this little squid. Not the exact cephalopod I was hoping for, but still super cool. We saw a slipper lobster, and then this little porcupine fish. Just then, our dive master Ezram circled his light to signal that he'd found something. It was an octopus. And then shortly after leaving the first octopus, we found another slightly smaller one. These little dudes seriously are so weird and cute. We saw a couple more neat critters of the pufferfish persuasion, but by now the dive was nearing its end. Just before we surfaced, a spotted eagle ray cruised overhead. With our courses behind us, we went into the next day ready for some fun dives. The first dive of the day was phenomenal. We returned to the same site where Vince and I did our first deep dive, but this time all we had to do was explore and have fun. Our dive plan took us through a towering underwater canyon where we got to explore some narrower restrictions as we descended down to 100 feet. Along the way, we ran into the resident nurse shark who decided to tag along for the rest of the dive. It seemed like as we were becoming more familiar with the local dive sites, our nurse shark encounters were getting better and better. We also saw another large barracuda and a spiny lobster. We made an 8-minute safety stop on this mooring line, where we had our closest encounter with a reef shark as of yet, before getting back onto the boat. Our next dive of the day was at a shallower reef with lots of corals and colorful reef fish. I particularly liked this juvenile stoplight parrotfish because of its beautiful pattern. Of course, no dive could seem to pass without an appearance from a nurse shark. Or two. The way these sharks follow you around doing loopy swim patterns definitely brings a fun feeling to the dive. I can see why a lot of people fondly refer to them as sea puppies, because they do have a dog-like energy about them. That being said, I wouldn't trust them to not eat my fingers like I do my family's golden retriever. Late in the dive, we found a spotted lobster tucked into a little hole, and one of the nurse sharks was clearly harboring hopes of snacking on it. That afternoon, we took an extra dive trip out to Holchan Marine Reserve, a heavily protected area that spans about 3 square miles. Holchan means little channel in Mayan, a reference to a shallow sandy channel that cuts through the reef. Since we were diving in very shallow water, only about 6 to 10 feet deep, the fish and corals looked extra vibrant. Not having that extra 50 feet of blue water between me and the sunshine meant that I was able to get much more colorful footage on my GoPro than usual. This hermit crab was pretty neat. So was this spotted eagle ray. And this southern stingray that somehow lost its tail. At the end of the dive, we spotted some sea puppies taking an ocean nap. Adorable. Next, we went to snorkel in Shark Ray Alley, which, as its name suggests, is the hangout spot for sharks and rays. Lots of tourist boats chum the water once they arrive at Shark Ray Alley, but our operator, Scuba School and Family Dive Center, does not. Our dive master explained that once the sharks realized we weren't going to feed them, they would swim away pretty quickly, and he was right. We jumped into the water amidst a swarm of sharks, but they soon lost interest and swam off in every direction, leaving us to hang out with straggling tangs, jacks, and the occasional ray. Eventually, another boat pulled up and started chumming the water, so we did get to see a comparison of how the sharks act when there is chum in the water versus when there's not. I came away from Shark Ray Alley feeling like it had been fun, but it was kind of a spectacle. Seeing a bunch of sharks in one place was definitely cool, but it honestly wasn't as fun as having them follow you around a dive site, displaying their more natural behaviors. Alright, it's my first time checking in today because we've been pretty busy. This was our 3rd day of diving. Today was just fun dives because we all finished all of our classes already. We did a deep dive this morning, which was awesome. Then our 2nd dive, there were a couple more nurse sharks following us around again. So then we came back, had a quick lunch, and after that we went out to Holchan Marine Reserve. That is a pristine area. There's no fishing or anything allowed out there. The fish and the coral are just allowed to thrive in their natural state. It's totally protected. So we had a really shallow dive there. And then after that, we went snorkeling at Shark Ray Alley. And there were a lot of nurse sharks there, and we did see a handful of stingrays as well. Now we're back, and we're just gearing up for tomorrow because it's going to be a really long day. We're going out to the Blue Hole, which is one of the most famous places in Belize. And we're all really excited about that, but we got a bright and early start tomorrow, so we're gonna get to bed pretty early tonight. Back on land, we were more than ready for dinner. David decided to order a lionfish, which are an invasive species in the Atlantic and very harmful to the underwater ecosystem throughout the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. This is it. It's 5 a.m. and we are about to head to the Blue Hole. We're so happy to be awake. We enjoyed a beautiful sunrise as we sped across the open sea toward Lighthouse Reef and the Great Blue Hole. It would take 2.5 hours to reach the Blue Hole, which left me with plenty of time to imagine how my experience there would turn out. I did feel a bit apprehensive as we jumped into the water and started our descent over a sandy edge and into the fathomless blue abyss with seemingly no bottom. The water got darker and colder as we neared our maximum depth of 130 feet, and our dive master led us into a recessed cave in the side of the hole. We followed him through a maze of huge stalactites. The time in the cave felt very short, because it was. It had only been about 8 minutes since we hit the water that we started our ascent. This is because of a couple of different factors, but simply put, more time at that depth means more risk of decompression sickness. From start to finish, the dive only lasted 28 minutes. Basically, the whole thing felt like it was over once it had barely started, and we all returned to the boat having experienced one of the world's most famous bucket list dives. The Blue Hole has a certain mystique about it, but my personal interests lie more in wildlife, and Lighthouse Reef Atoll reputably has some of the best preserved reefs in Belize. I was excited to get back in the water at Half Moon Wall, and my expectations were indeed met. For starters, there was a lot of coral, which in turn means a lot of colorful fish. When it comes to diving in the Caribbean, I really love seeing these huge barrel sponges and taking a peek inside of them to see if anything's living in there. The shark situation was also awesome, which is to say, there were a lot of them. Of course, we had our grouper tag-alongs, a phenomenon that I was growing accustomed to. Our dive master found a lionfish in a little hole and showed it to the grouper, who responded with curiosity. I thought it was a really cool sight to see a human communicating with a fish. This dive really kept on giving right up until the very end, when I got the closest encounter I would have with a reef shark on the whole trip. After diving Half Moon Wall, we got off the boat on an island called Half Moon Caye to eat lunch. Half Moon Caye is Belize's oldest wildlife protection area, first established as a bird sanctuary in 1924, and I was eager to hit the trail and explore with the limited time that we had on our lunch break. We dove the Blue Hole this morning. Now we are on Half Moon Caye for lunch, and this island is absolutely beautiful. You can see behind me the forest is just pristine. The tall palm trees framing a view of pastel blue ocean looked like they had been pulled from a postcard, and as we walked further down the trail, we encountered some of the island's shyest residents. Along this entire trail are little hermit crabs. You really have to watch your step because they're all over the place. Although the hermit crabs were a lot of fun, the highlight of the trail was a birding tower where we got an up-close view of red-footed boobies and frigate birds. We spent more time looking at hermit crabs on the way back to our boat, but eventually we realized we only had about 5 minutes until it was scheduled to leave, so we actually ran the rest of the way back, which I did not think to film, unfortunately. I was definitely sad to leave the island. I would have loved to spend a couple of nights camping there. As we motored back out to sea, clouds filled up the sky, and by the time we jumped off the boat for our final dive, it was raining. Although that really doesn't matter when you're planning on being underwater for the next hour anyway. This dive site was called the Aquarium, and its reef was really beautiful. I could hear crackling sounds coming from the reef in the shallower areas, which is a characteristic that I've come to associate with reef health. There were also lots and lots of fish, including the school of jacks, which were really cool. We spent our safety stop surrounded by chubs and then resurfaced, having completed our final dive of the trip. Although our dive time was over, the long ride back to San Pedro was a lot of fun. The four of us laid out on the boat's bow the whole way back and soaked in the views as we passed through Turnef Atoll. It was a nice bit of relaxation after an exciting week of diving. Well, it's been a really fun few days in San Pedro, but it is time for us to finally leave and head back to the mainland. We're sad to leave, but the good thing is the trip isn't even halfway over. We've got some exciting jungle adventures coming up, and today we are headed out to our next stop in San Ignacio. We hopped back on the water taxi to travel back to Belize City, and I spent the ride eagerly anticipating the adventures we are about to have in the rainforest. Next time on Birds of the Air Travel. Okay, I'm getting kind of worried, so I guess I'm going into the cave.